artists, and welcome to day 73 of the Epic Journey. My name is DaleneFM. Today we're going to be discussing Impressionism and some of the principles that were employed by the Impressionists. Now, to understand Impressionism from a basic point of view, we need to understand what led to Impressionism. It was actually a rebellious movement, and the word Impressionism arose as an insult, in fact. The Impressionist painters wanted to buck the system at the time, and at the time the salons were demanding paintings that were idealized. So paintings that were acceptable were paintings that depicted the ideal version of a particular scene. The Impressionists then came along and decided that they didn't want to necessarily paint what was ideal. They wanted to paint what was real. They wanted to paint their emotional response to something. They were not accepted into the salons, and they were forced to organize their own exhibitions and open their own galleries. Of course, today Impressionism is very popular even amongst contemporary artists, and we're going to have a look at some contemporary Impressionist work as well. To understand Impressionism and the principles that were employed, we need to have a look at a thing called juxtaposition. Now, juxtaposition can mean many things, but in terms of two-dimensional art, juxtaposition is the placing of one color next to another so that the two colors together have a visual impact. So they're juxtaposed against one another, creating a sort of a contrast. Some of the Impressionists used a thing called pointillism. So let's have a look at pointillism first, and then we'll go further into other parts of Impressionism. Now, pointillism, we have a look at today. We often refer to it in art as stippling. So you can draw with little dots, much like a modern day inkjet printer might spray little dots onto the paper to create the overall effect. So what we're looking at here is a little grayscale drawing made up of millions and millions of little dots. When you stand back and have a look at it, you get all the different variations of values, and so it looks like a really great drawing. But this is using stippling, which is dots of a single color, in this case black. But the Impressionists were very well known for juxtaposing colors together, and of course Georges Seurat was the most famous of all the juxtapositions or the pointillist artists. So let's start with him. Now, this is a painting that he did in the 1800s called Circus Parade, and when you look at the entire painting as we're looking at it there, we don't see specific, we can see a granular effect, but we don't necessarily see specific dots. But if we go and have a look at a very close-up of part of the painting, we can see how the entire painting is made up of lots and lots of little dots of color. So his brush strokes weren't so much strokes as what they were dots. This is another Seurat painting, Seated Bather, if I'm not mistaken. And again, when we look at the entire painting, we get this overall feel of a slightly granular effect, but we're not really aware of dots specifically until we go and have a closer look. And there we can see that it's quite granular, quite dotty. He's used lots and lots of little colors next to each other. I have another example here that shows it a little bit better there, where we can see in the green there's lots of little bits of red, bits of pink, bits of blue, and the different shades of green are not created by different shades of green paint so much as what they're created by a different density of the various colors. In the lighter areas there'll be more yellow, in the darker areas there'll be more blue dots, for example. Now, this one, A Sunday at the Legrand Jetty, this is probably his most famous painting. Pointillism was probably at its peak at this point, excuse the pun. But I think what is most interesting about this painting is we have a look at this little close-up over here. We can see how his style was extremely dotty, and there was lots and lots of little colors together next to one another that created an overall effect. Now, this apparently is a detail of the chappie sitting in the foreground here on the bottom left-hand side. That's a detail of his pants, I believe. Those lots and lots of tiny little dots of all the different colors would create the overall effect that we look at there. So pointillism is effectively painting with dots. So yes, we can't look at pointillism without looking at Georges Seurat, because he was by far the most avid fan of pointillism. But if we go and have a look at Van Gogh, he did a very similar thing. Some of his paintings are quite pointillistic, and this little detail we can see in the background where he used a lot of pointillism, and in the collar and his suit top we can see lots of pointillism. But his face is actually not all that different, except in the case of his face he's using brush strokes rather than brush dots, but it's still the same concept where he's putting colors next to each other to create a visual effect. In the eyebrow, for example, have a look at all those sort of grey greens that he's got there in amongst the flesh tones, and in his moustache and beard, how he's got little bits of green and little bits of very dark burgundy and the other little bits of much more natural colour, and the whole lot together will create the shadows and the highlights of his hairy moustache. So although Van Gogh is not necessarily known for his pointillism, there's not a lot of difference in the theory behind what he was doing. Another Van Gogh, again, lots of juxtaposition going on here. Now, the important thing about Impressionism is not so much how they did it, the brushstrokes, the pointillism, etc. It's they were attempting to paint a scene as they felt it, as they saw it. So light was incredibly important. Now, this is something that I always smile at, because the Impressionists are particularly well known for painting light, in inverted commas. The play of light and object was hugely important. But if you have a look through old masters painting right up to modern day painting, I look at this and go, well, isn't all two-dimensional art or two-dimensional painting got to do with light? Because the only way that we can see an object is if light is shining on it, and what we're painting is how the light is catching it. So I don't personally believe that the Impressionists were any more involved with light than anybody else, but the difference with them was that became the emphasis, whereas before the Impressionists came along, the idealization of a scene or of a person or of a religious ideal particularly was much more important. With the Impressionists, the lighting became a much more important aspect than it had ever been before. Now there we've got Van Gogh as well. Now I heard it said some time ago, and it really brought home to me what Impressionism really is. If you are painting a night scene and there's a moon in the sky, and the moon is particularly beautiful, and you get the impression of this moon being this beautiful big moon in the sky, but if you painted it to be exactly the size that it really is and the scale that it actually is, it's going to end up being really, really small, because it's actually as big as it is in your imagination, more than what it is actually in real life. So that was the hallmark of the Impressionists, is that they would paint something as they felt it to be, the impression that they got of it, and that's what they were trying to depict, more so than the actual accuracy of the moment. Now you'll see Van Gogh's stars here, all these little twinkles around the stars, and what he was trying to do there was to create his impression of how those stars were glowing and twinkling in that night sky. Now what I liked about this one was that Van Gogh's sky is just completely yellow. Now he was obviously painting an early morning scene, the sunrise was coming up, and his impression of the sky was this beautifully, brightly yellow lit sky. So that's how he painted the sky, yellow. He didn't take into account at all the fact that there were other colors in the sky, because it was his impression of the sky that was important at that moment. Now we're having a look at Claude Monet. Again, look at the juxtaposition going on here. There's pointillism, but to a much looser degree. This is more brush strokes than what it is dots, but it's still going on there. And the juxtaposition of the one color against the other, particularly up in the sky where we see the blues and the yellows coming together to form this sort of greeny area. The object is not so much important as what the colors and the light and the shimmering effect of that scene that he's looking at has become. This is also Auguste Renoir. Now I want you to have a look at this one specifically, because I want to take a look at some of the more modern Impressionists, and this particular artist, Renoir, I think has had a lot of influence on modern Impressionists, the Impressionists working today. And we'll go back a little bit, and we'll come back and have a look at this in relationship to what's happening at the moment in the art place. Now this is also a lovely one here where we can see the juxtaposition going on, the pointillism thing going on. This is still Auguste Renoir, and how we can see little flecks of red, little flecks of blue, and the different lights and dark greens, and lots of little bits of very light yellows that are coming into those greens to bring them out. So it's the play of colors, one color in relationship to another, that becomes important with Impressionism. Brush strokes are hugely important in Impressionism. They were not looking for perfection. Right, now we're getting into some of the modern Impressionists. Now this is my very favorite modern Impressionist, Vladimir Vologov. I wonder how he would feel about himself being called an Impressionist. I don't know if he sees himself that way. but his art is very impressionistic in the sense that it conforms to quite a lot of the impressionistic ideals, mainly the use of light and the bold use of brush strokes and colors that are placed one against the other. This is another Vladimir Vologov, where he's done a very impressionistic thing with the light. This bright backlit little girl is very impressionistic. His brush strokes are much looser and softer. You know, I think Impressionism has obviously grown since it was first introduced to us back in the 1800s. It is still very much understood that Impressionism is about the impression that you're creating and about the light that you're trying to capture. And when you deploy brush strokes, big, bold, beautiful brush strokes, and the juxtaposition of color into a painting where you're trying to create a light effect, you will get an impressionistic kind of feel and look and feel about your work. That's also Vladimir Vologov. This one I wanted to show you because of the light, the way that he's used light here. He's incredibly good at using light. Now, in my humble personal opinion, Vladimir Vologov has taken what artists like Renoir did in the 1800s and given us a huge leap forward. Now, I actually wrote to Vladimir Vologov the one day, and I told him that. I told him that, in my opinion, he had taken what the Impressionists and specifically Renoir had given us and expanded it a lot further. Because as modern artists, we have the privilege of hindsight. We can learn from these guys. These guys were breaking ground, remember. We, however, have got the privilege of them having broken that ground, and we can now tread on ground that has been already tilled, and this kind of painting is now accepted in today's modern society. I'd like to show you the type of commonality that I'm talking about here. This is Renoir by the water near the lake, it's called. And then we have a look at Vladimir Vologov's lady standing up against the wall. There's a heck of a lot of similarities in this. Okay, this is another guy's name is Willem Heinrich. He also is very Renoir-ish in the way that he presents his paintings. The whole crux of this whole impressionistic thing is the brush strokes, the daubs of color, the contrast of colors, the juxtaposition of one against the other, and how 2 or 3 or 4 colors can work together to create a visual effect from a distance. And this particular painting does it very well, as do all of these, I think, that I've chosen to show you here. And there was many more that I could have shown you, and there were many other impressionistic artists that I could have, the impressionist artists at the time I'm talking about, that I could have shown you, but we would have been here all night with a very long video. But have a look at this wall behind the bench, how we've got almost creams and a calico color. We've got a very bright orange in there, a very dark maroon, and sort of a mid-orange. We've got all these colors playing together to create that light effect on the wall. So now that we've had a look at some of those paintings, let's go back and have a look at the definition of Impressionism. So as an artist, if you're trying to create the visual impression of the moment, you're not going to be as concerned with reality as what you are with how you see that reality. So if you see the moon in the sky as being incredibly big, then that's how you would paint it, regardless of what scale it actually was. If you see a color as being particularly bright, then you would paint it especially bright, like Van Gogh with his yellow sky. It's how you are feeling that moment at that time. Artists, I hope that has helped you to understand what Impressionism is. It wasn't intended to be a critique, as it might have appeared to be as we were going through those paintings. What I was trying to get across to you is what Impressionism actually is and why Impressionism was so controversial in its time, and what it was about Impressionism that has influenced modern day contemporary painting. Contemporary as in post-World War II in terms of being an era, as well as contemporary in terms of a specific style. There's a fine line between contemporary painting and modern Impressionism painting. It can actually almost be one and the same thing, and this is something that we're going to go through when we're doing our Impressionistic painting in a couple of days' time. We'll be discussing things as we're painting as well. So this was an introduction into Impressionism, so that from now going forward, when you start working on a painting, we can have a little bit clearer idea of what we're trying to achieve with Impressionism. So artist, I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to Impressionism, and I ask you please, if you would like and share and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I will see you tomorrow in day 74. Thank you for joining me. Bye. That's what you want to do.